Hi guys, Techman here. Today we're going to be taking a look at this little but powerful portable power station, the EB55 from Bluetti. Now, I've known the Bluetti brand before its Bluetti days. I owned the Power Oak K2 power bank several years ago. Some of you will be familiar with this versatile device. They also go under the name Max Oak in the US, and if I'm not mistaken, Power Oak is the name they use in the EU. In any case, those of you who own or have previously owned the K2 would know how handy it was to charge multiple USB devices and laptops whilst on the go. My K2 sadly died a couple of years ago, but I got plenty of use out of it, and perhaps I was the architect of my own downfall in that I used it excessively as a pass-through device. But Power Oak, or Bluetti should I say, have grown considerably since the days of the K2. The EB150 and the EB240 power stations quickly became popular and put Bluetti on the map. But it was the AC200 and its modular series or units that attracted customers worldwide and arguably opened a new chapter in the portable power station world. Anyways, back to the EB55. This is my first experience with a Bluetti branded product. I've now had the opportunity to cycle it daily for an entire month, and I've noted down my observations. So what's under the hood and what have I observed so far? Well, time to find out.
It's go time!
In the box you receive the EB55 unit itself. A 200 watt wall charger with a 7909 or 7.9mm port. The charger is rated at 25.2 volts with a max current of 8 amps. We'll come back to the charger a little later. Bluetti also provide a car charger cable so you can charge the unit from a 12 volt or 24 volt vehicle, and an MC4 to XT60 cable to charge a unit from a compatible solar panel. I quite like the quality of these cables. The added silicone protection is brilliant. Not just some cheap junk we find with many generic power stations on the market. Though I would say it's a shame they're using 16 gauge cables. I would have much preferred 12 gauge or at the very least 14 gauge cables. You also receive a pretty basic user manual and a warranty card in the box. Bluetti offers a 24-month manufacturer's warranty with the EB55. The manual itself is pretty straightforward with the standard information you would expect with the majority of power stations on the market, such as product features, input and output specifications, and safety information. Now back to the unit itself, and as you can see, this particular EB55 has a blue outer shell, but there are orange and grey variants available to purchase from Bluetti. I think, in particular with these smaller power stations, having a choice of colours is a bonus. You can pick your favourite colour or the colour that best suits your environment. Now the entire outer shell is made from plastic and the structure does feel sturdy. Fans are placed on both sides of the unit, allowing air to pass through the unit and keeping the internal circuitry cool. Weighing in at 7.5 kilos or 16.5 pounds, the EB55 is a touch heavier than its Jackery counterpart, the Explorer 500. But that's largely due to the safer, longer lasting but heavier lithium iron phosphate chemistry cells the EB55 houses inside. As for the dimensions, I've popped them at the bottom of the screen. The size and weight of the unit are manageable. It's not something you'd walk around with all day, but certainly practical for camping or a road trip. And the small form factor makes it easy to stow away without much notice. Talking of portability, Bluetti have incorporated a folding handle at the top of the unit. The retractable handle and flat surface makes the unit stackable, although Bluetti advises not to stack anything on top of the unit. So long as your load is light, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But that's my opinion. You may wish to follow the manual to the letter.
Why is your book upside down?
I'm reading about Australia.
The flat surface also allows room for a wireless charging pad, so you can charge your phone, well, as the name suggests, wirelessly. It's also good to note that EB55 is not waterproof and certainly not shock resistant against drops or falls. There is no IP certification, and only the charging inputs and the 12 volt car plug have caps to protect them from water and dust. So keep it away from water and certainly don't try to throw it off a cliff. Now on the front of the unit there are plenty of output ports to power and charge your devices, gadgets and AC appliances. Individual switches control each of the circuits, conserving power from unused circuits. A good feature, but pretty much standard nowadays with most portable power stations in the market. Now there are two sets of DC circuits, each controlled by an independent switch. On the left there are four 5V USB-A ports rated at a max of 3 amps. Sadly there are no quick charge ports, but I found they do charge 5V devices quickly. The drawback here is that you're not going to see the kind of speeds you will see with quick charge USB ports, as there's no 9V or 12V charging support from these USB-A ports. I've also noticed that while each USB port can output 3 amps, there are two sets of USB circuits here. and each circuit is capped at 3 amps, so you can't draw the full 3 amps from this pair or this pair simultaneously. If you want to charge two devices that draw perhaps 2 to 3 amps each, the workaround is to use one port from each circuit as I demonstrate here.
Bravo.
On a positive note, there is a single 100 watt USB-C power delivery port, and I must say, for a portable power station of this size to have a 100 watt USB-C port is pretty impressive. Both the Lithium 2048 Wh power station and the All Powers Monster X have 60 watts USB-C ports, so kudos to Bluetti for including a fast USB-C port. The second DC circuit comprises of a 12V car cigarette lighter port and two DC 5521 or 5.5mm by 2.1mm outlets. All the DC ports are regulated and are rated at 10 amps. And while each 12V port can pump out 10 amps, the entire circuit is capped at 10 amps. Hence, it's 10 amps shared across all three ports. Personally, I would have liked to see all three ports pumping out 10 amps simultaneously and not shared across them. Beneath the DC ports, there are two 3-pin AC sockets, at least in the UK version. The EB55 has an impressive 700 watt pure sine wave inverter with a surge of 1400 watts, and that's a lot of power given the size of the unit. Now, it's worth mentioning the 700 watts is shared across both sockets, and while it is plenty of power for camping and trips, it won't run your power-hungry appliances. So be sure to check your appliance before plugging it into the unit. Nowadays we do have energy efficient small appliances for RVers and travellers, and for the most part the EB55 will run them with ease. Moving on to the top base, the EB55 houses a neat 15 watt wireless charging pad. And while I personally don't use wireless charging that often, I was surprised how easy it was on the EB55 when compared to other power stations I have tried. The wireless charging works almost every time on the EB55. On other power stations and portable chargers I have tried, it takes a few attempts to find the sweet spot for charging at optimal speed. Do note that in order to charge your device wirelessly, you must first turn on the USB circuitry by pressing the DC switch. Now, the UK version of the EB55 has 10 outputs on the front of the device and one on the top base, the wireless charging pad. That's 11 outputs in total.
This is not rocket science.
The US version has 13 outlets, and that's because it has 4 AC sockets compared to the 2 sockets in the UK and the EU units. We lose 2 AC outlets due to the size of the UK sockets. There's nothing new here. Even large power stations like Lithium's 2048 Wh power station and Bluetti's AC200P have fewer AC sockets in the UK compared to their US counterparts. Moving on to the LCD screen, it's bright, it's clearly visible, even in the dark. It shows you the total watts coming in and going out the unit, but I'm not too fond of the battery bar status. There's no battery percentage to indicate remaining state of charge or SOC, and it's one of the biggest disappointments of this unit. Even the older PowerOak K5 unit has battery bars and SOC or state of charge in percentage, so this is a bit of a backward step from Bluetti. Now, you might have noticed a small eco indicator in the corner and you might be wondering, what is this eco mode? Well, first of all, don't look for the answer in the manual because it isn't there. Sure, there's guidance on how to switch eco mode on and off, but nowhere does it explain what this mode does. But not to worry, I'm sure I can help with that. Eco mode is basically a power saving feature. When turned on, the system will automatically turn off the AC output when the AC output is below 20 watts for a period of 4 hours. Remember, the AC inverter consumes energy to convert the DC power stored in the battery to AC power for your AC loads. Even when running idle, the inverter tends to consume, say, about 7 watts per hour. So having eco mode on can help reduce the idle power consumption and preserve battery power. However, if you are going to be running low power loads for a lengthy period, it's best to switch this feature off. Now, the back of the unit sports a fairly decent flashlight. It's a common feature with all small to mid-range and even some larger portable power stations. And while most power station flashlights are pretty much limited, the EB55's light can be handy when your main flashlight is, well, not a hand, if you know what I mean.
That's a good one.
And it's not just a flimsy light or gimmick like on other power stations. This light can actually serve as a mini reading lamp if the situation ever arises. It's also an improvement on the small light on the front of the EB70 from Bluetti. There are the three common modes of light: low, high and SOS. Now the EB55 has two input ports to charge the unit. On the left is a male XT60 connector to hook up a compatible solar panel or charge the unit via a 12V or 24V vehicle. On the right, Bluetti have installed their customary 7.9mm or 7909 connector to charge the unit via the included AC adapter. As for charging methods, the EB55 can be charged via the AC adapter in approximately 3.5 hours. Charging via a 12V vehicle will take approximately 6.5 hours. Alternatively, a 24V vehicle or a 24V battery for that matter can charge the unit in as little as 3 hours. The EB55 accepts up to 200 watts of solar at a max of 8 amps. The inbuilt MPPT charge controller regulates the energy coming in from the solar panel and charges the internal batteries efficiently. The solar input range is 12 to 28 volts, which for the size of this unit is fine. Although I would have liked to see the max voltage raised to somewhere between 35 to 40 volts. Charging via solar at the max 200 watts will charge the unit up in approximately 3 hours, although it will take longer to charge if you're charging at a slower pace. Now what's great about the EB55 is that it can be charged from 0 to 80% in as little as 1 hour, and it can be charged to 100% in just under 2.5 hours. Now how's that possible, you might ask? Well, it's thanks to the dual charging feature. In other words, you can charge the unit using both input ports simultaneously. That's a total of 400 watts of input power. So, if you need to charge up the unit in a hurry, you can plug in your solar panels to the XT60 connector and the included AC adapter to the 7.9mm barrel port. There's also the option to plug in two AC adapters to reach the same fast charging speed, although you'll need to purchase an additional AC adapter from Bluetti to achieve this. As for recommended solar panels, Bluetti advise using their PV120 or PV200 solar panels. Now Bluetti didn't provide me with any of them, so I can't vouch for them. As you already know, I don't recommend a product I haven't tested. I do own a pair of 100 watt Solar Saga solar panels from Jackery, and I can confirm they work well with the EB55. We'll discuss solar charging a little later in this video. Now the EB55 houses 537 watt-hours worth of lithium iron phosphate cells, which, according to Bluetti, are rated at 2500 cycles to 80% depth of discharge. In simple terms, after a whopping 2500 cycles of this unit, you'd expect to lose the top 20% of the battery capacity, but it would still retain 80% of its capacity. Suffice to say, the unit will last you a long time. And that's one of the many benefits of lithium iron phosphate chemistry cells. They have a longer shelf life than, say, lithium NMC cells found in EVs, smartphones, laptops and other portable electrical equipment. As I mentioned before, the unit has a 537 watt-hour capacity battery. It's good to note that in typical day-to-day use, you can expect to get about 480 watts of power out of the battery. And that's because the internal AC-DC circuitry, safety features, etc. consume small amounts of power. Manufacturers tend to reserve the final 5 to 10% of the battery, or set their BMS to cut off around 5% to preserve the longevity of the battery. That final reserve will help keep your unit healthy for longer, but essentially the usable capacity will vary depending on your application and devices. So don't be deceived by the 537 watt-hour figure. That's the capacity of the internal battery, not the usable capacity. And that's the common trend in the portable power station market. Products are advertised and categorized by the capacity of the internal battery. To the best of my knowledge, Leoc are the only manufacturer to market their product with the total usable capacity. Now, moving forward with my evaluation, I've cycled and tested the unit for a whole month. So what have I observed and what are my views on the EB55? Well, to begin with, I dug in and did some background research on the unit, and I discovered that the unit has a 22.4 volt 24 amp hour battery. That would imply that the internal lithium iron phosphate cells are in a 7S configuration. And as you might already know, lithium iron phosphate cells have a nominal voltage of 3.2 volts. So let's do the maths. 22.4 divided by 3.2 equals 7. That's quite an uncommon configuration for lithium iron phosphate chemistry, but inside an all-in-one unit this isn't an issue. Now, remember when I said we'll come back to the included AC adapter? Well, that's because it is a 25.2 volt charger, which those of you who are acquainted with the lithium NMC cell technology will probably recognize and be familiar with. But how does it fit with lithium iron phosphate cells integrated in the EB55? Well, here's what I think Bluetti is doing. You see, lithium iron phosphate cells are fully charged at 3.65 volts. Multiply 3.65 by 7, the configuration inside the unit, and you get 25.55 volts. If we divide 25.2 by 7, we get 3.6 volts. So I presume Bluetti is charging the cells up to 3.6 volts rather than 3.65 volts. And practically there's nothing wrong with that. Research and experiments suggest there's not much noticeable difference in charging to 3.6 volts, which in a typical 4S configuration would be 14.4 volts. So although the difference is minimal, if any, the charging parameter adopted by Bluetti is absolutely fine in my humble opinion. Again, this is my assumption based on the charger and the cell configuration here. I do apologize if this is a bit technical for some of you, but I trust this information is beneficial to those of you with advanced knowledge of lithium-based chemistries. Now, coming back down to Earth and the unit itself, it arrived 40 to 60% charged. And I say 40 to 60% because you can't pinpoint the exact state of charge due to the battery bars I mentioned earlier. I charged it up to full from a regulated DC power supply, and it took 344 watts to fully charge it from a DC source. The unit was taking in somewhere between 68 and 69 watts, and the fans came on almost instantly. They were relatively loud and remained on throughout the charging process. And there was a distinct smell emanating from the unit, a smell similar to that of a burning wire or electrical circuit board. It's hard to describe the smell and trace the source, but I wouldn't say it was hazardous, just uncomfortable when stationed close to the unit. From a distance, it's not so easily noticeable. A possible explanation is that the unit is new, or perhaps it's been in storage for a long time. I'll monitor this as the unit ages and completes further cycles. Now, does the unit allow pass-through charging? The answer is yes. You can charge the unit and recharge your devices from the unit simultaneously, although doing this regularly will lead to faster battery degradation, or put simply, it will reduce the lifespan of the unit. We briefly touched upon the Eco Mode feature earlier in this review, and there is a way to switch this feature on and off, but there's a problem. The manual suggests to get into the settings you need to hold the AC switch and DC switch simultaneously for 2 seconds. But wait, there are 2 DC circuits on the EB55. So which one do you need to hold down? The manual does not make it clear. And after some trial and error, I found out that you need to hold the AC and the USB DC switch to get into the settings. Once in the settings, you can turn Eco Mode on and off by simply pressing the DC button. You can also configure the AC output frequency here if required by pressing the AC button. So why isn't the instruction for turning Eco Mode on and off clear in the manual? Well, I've come to learn that the bigger brother to the EB55, the EB70, has one DC switch, and perhaps Bluetti copy and pasted these instructions from the EB70 manual. Next, the LCD display shows the input and output watts simultaneously. I did notice on one occasion that my OmniCharge power bank was balancing its cells at the top of the charge curve. The OmniCharge indicates it is charging too, yet the EB55 displays 0 watts coming out the unit. Staying with the LCD screen, I noticed a red battery icon when the unit was low on charge. Here's a close-up of the flashing icon. The manual suggests this indicates low cell voltage but doesn't elaborate further. But really, there's no need for a red alert icon. All you need is a shunt with an accurate state of charge indicator rather than battery bars. Surprisingly, after noticing the red icon, I was still able to pull another 33 watts before the battery fully depleted. Now I've completed several cycles and noticed that EB55 has a usable DC capacity of approximately 425 to 435 watts, which translates to approximately 80% of the total battery capacity. And that's because the internal circuits that regulate the USB and DC outputs take a little bit of power. But I would like to have seen a more respectable figure, say of around 460 to 470 watts DC capacity. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, the final 10% of the battery is kept in reserve by most manufacturers to protect the lifespan of the battery. And that's something I'd like all manufacturers to mention, the actual usable capacity of the unit based on 0.2C DC to DC discharge test. As for the AC circuit, I found its efficiency was similar at just about 80%, which is expected due to inverter losses. I also experimented with charging the unit from both 12 volt and 24 volt lithium iron phosphate batteries. And as I mentioned before, having a backup battery is a great way to expand the capacity of your portable power station. The unit charged at around 7.5 amps or 192 watts from my 24 volt lithium iron phosphate battery. And at the highest, I saw it was charging at 195 watts and 7.78 amps. At 12 volts, it takes around 68 to 70 watts with a maximum current of 5.4 amps. As for charging from solar, I hooked up two 100 watts Jackery Solar Saga solar panels in parallel to the EB55. The maximum charge I could get at 18 volts was 140 watts at 7.4 amps. I couldn't quite get it to achieve the 200 watts maximum solar charging we see in the product specifications. I guess this will only be achievable when charging at a higher voltage, say somewhere between 22 and 28 volts, like what we saw when I charged the unit from a 24 volt lithium iron phosphate battery. Bluetti do have a 120 watt and 200 watts folding solar panel, and both operate at around 20 volts and above, so I would assume 200 watts solar charging can be achieved with them. Again, I didn't receive solar panels with the unit, so I can't comment on their performance. If Bluetti were to send me some solar panels, I'll be happy to test while the UK summer lasts, or on days when we have clear blue skies here in the UK. On a side note, some of you may say the 200 watts maximum solar input is a bit limiting, and I understand this argument. But remember, many portable power stations in this range have a limit of 100 watts. So for the capacity, I think 200 watts is plenty of power. And of course, having the ability to charge at 300 or 400 watts from solar would be a bonus. But if you really want that sort of charging speed, you'd probably be better off purchasing a power station with a larger capacity battery. Next, the AC inverter handled loads of 700 watts with ease. In fact, I've been able to push the inverter over 700 watts, and it was able to take that like a breeze. While powering a vacuum cleaner, I did notice a sudden drop of power from 730 watts to around 680 watts. My initial thoughts were that the EB55 was lowering the AC voltage to manage the load, as we see with some other units in the market. But as you can see here, at 650 watts and even 700 watts, the EB55 maintains a healthy AC output voltage, which is exceptional. So what do I like about the EB55 from Bluetti? Well, there's a lot to admire about this neat unit. But here are some other standout features. First of all, the lithium iron phosphate battery. This chemistry is safer than other forms of lithium chemistries used in portable devices, and it can handle significantly more charge cycles, and I mean thousands of cycles. Of course, your mileage may vary based on your application method, but if you take care of your unit, the battery will last you a long time. Next, the 700 watt pure sine wave AC inverter. Remarkably, Bluetti have thrown in an inverter that can pump out more than 500 watts. It's the same size inverter found in the Bluetti EB70, the bigger brother of the EB55. The 100 watt USB-C port is also a bonus. Typically we see 45 watt or 60 watt ports in power stations in this category. The dual 400 watt charging is also well received. Personally, I don't see myself often resorting to dual charging, but if you're off-grid for days at a time or need to charge a unit up quickly, I'm sure you'll appreciate this feature. And it's not something we often see on smaller portable power stations, so I think Bluetti have been clever to add this feature to the EB55. I also like the 15 watt wireless charging pad on the top base of the unit. It's simple and handy without intruding the external case of the unit. The folding handle is something I advocate and nice to see implemented by Bluetti. It keeps the unit discreet and easy to tuck away, while also allowing the top base to house a wireless charging pad. I also like the quality of the cables Bluetti includes with the unit. You've got everything you need to get started and make full use of the unit. Perhaps the only thing missing is a carry case to pop in all the cables and keep organized. Now, what don't I like about the unit, and how can Bluetti improve the EB55? Well, I'd start with the LCD display. In today's day and age, there's really no reason not to display an accurate reading of the remaining capacity or state of charge. Estimating the capacity based on a battery bar system that goes up in increments of 20 is painful and outdated. And when running the unit down, you're never quite sure how close to empty you are. It's always a guessing game. Although not essential, displaying the estimated runtime or time to full charge would be a handy feature to have on the EB55. I would also suggest that the display be configured to stay on for longer. At present, it goes off too quickly, and there's no display button to toggle the display on again. You have to press one of the switches to prop up the display. And if you're utilizing all three circuits, I would imagine this can be a bit of a pain, as pressing one of the switches will turn that particular circuit off. Installing a display button next to the display, of course, would be the perfect fix for this issue, like what we see with the Jackery Explorer 500. I also think the solar input range can be increased, let's say somewhere between 10 and 40 volts. We see plenty of external MPPT charge controllers in the market that can take up to 100 volts of solar power. Even low-end charge controllers tend to accept at least 60 volts of solar, and I'd like to see this sort of range on modern-day portable power stations. This would allow two solar panels to be connected in series for those who prefer a series connection over a parallel connection. Next, the supplied AC adapter most certainly charges the unit at 200 watts, but annoyingly, the fan on the power brick runs at full speed the whole time, even when running idle. It never turns off. You don't want to leave it bedside or sleep overnight in the same room when charging from the AC power brick. Bluetti need to figure out a way to tackle this problem. On the subject of noise, the internal fans on the EB55 are equally annoying. The fans remain on pretty much the whole charge cycle. Even during a direct DC to DC charge and charging at only 50 watts, the fans stay on the entire time. Keeping the internal circuitry and battery cool is a fundamental feature of any portable power station, and the fans are there to serve this purpose. But Bluetti need to experiment on how to keep the noise level to a minimum or perhaps install quieter fans. I also noticed that 12-volt cigarette plugs do not sit flush into the socket. I tried several plugs and the issue remained the same. I would imagine this may be a cause of concern if you're on the road and traveling through rough terrain. So do check your 12-volt device is securely plugged in before setting off. Moving on, I believe some minor adjustments would make a significant difference to the EB55, and some suggestions may increase its value and also make it more appealing. First of all, the USB-C port. Perhaps Bluetti can integrate a bidirectional USB-C port to support charging the unit from a USB-C power source. Staying on the USB-C circuitry, it would do no harm to install quick charge USB ports that support, say, 18 watts of power delivery. I'd also like them to remove the 3A sharing cap between two USB ports, allowing each USB port to work independently. And the same goes with the DC circuitry. Each port should be able to supply 10 amps of current independent of the other. I'd also like to see a separate switch for the wireless charging pad, similar to what we see on the Allpower's 288 Wh portable power station. With the current setup, when using USB ports, the wireless charging pad is always on. And of course, the circuit uses power even when not in use. I appreciate the idle power consumption may be little, but it soon adds up and every little helps. I also noticed that the switches do not always turn on or off despite registering a touch. You have to forcefully press them to turn them on and off properly. Here you see I press the DC switch and you can see that it recognizes a touch because the LCD display lights up, but the DC circuit hasn't turned on. And the same goes for the USB and AC switches. And finally, the instructions on how to access the settings need to be corrected in the manual as I demonstrated earlier. Well, that's all I have to say in terms of my honest and impartial review of the EB55 from Bluetti. That brings us to perhaps the most important question, and one that I'm sure some of you are burning to ask me. Would I recommend this unit to you? In a nutshell, if the size of this unit fits your needs and requirements, I'd say yes. The single most persuasive reason is that lithium iron phosphate battery that Bluetti throws into this unit. It's built to last, and if you take care of it, it's gonna last you a long time. So if you're looking for an intermediate or medium-sized portable power station and the AC and DC output specifications are within your requirements, the EB55 is a no-brainer and an option to certainly consider. The large 700 watt inverter is unparalleled in the 500 Wh circuit category, at least to the best of my knowledge. Sure, it can't power some of the larger power-hungry tools and appliances, but remember, this unit is not built for that purpose. Bluetti have separate units to tackle those types of loads, but for everything else, the EB55 is a competitive unit. It's light enough to carry on a camping trip without adding too much weight to your luggage. It can charge up in as little as 2 hours thanks to integrated dual charge feature. It also has an impressive 100 watt USB-C port to charge your USB-C laptops in lightning speeds, as long as your laptop accepts that sort of speed of course. There aren't many power stations of this size in the market that can do that. And if you can overlook the cons we discussed, I would recommend taking a look at this unit when you're hunting for a mid-range portable power station. The EB55 is miles ahead of the Jackery Explorer 500. And if I was to choose between the EB55 from Bluetti and the Explorer 500 from Jackery, well, there's only one winner for me, and that's the EB55. And it's because the EB55 has a bigger flashlight.
What the hell are you talking about?
Nah, just kidding. Now, that isn't to say there isn't a better unit out there, and that's why I always say do your research before throwing your money at a product. But from the mid-range portable power stations I have used and tested, the EB55 currently is the one I would recommend. Add in a suitable solar panel and you have a pretty decent setup and a backup emergency power supply. Right, that's all I have to say about the EB55. The next step is for me to put this unit into daily use for 12 months, and I hope to provide an update around about this time next year on how this unit is doing. And of course, I'll keep you posted if I notice anything unusual in the meantime. If you are interested in the EB55, I have provided links in the description depending on your geographical location, and I will also include links to the unit on various Amazon stores if Amazon is your preferred marketplace. Remember, these are not affiliate links, and I make no money if you decide to go ahead and make a purchase. I'm not here for the money. My goal is to provide my honest opinion and help you in whatever capacity I can. And at the same time, I'm optimistic my suggestions can help manufacturers build better portable power stations. Do you own an EB55? What are your thoughts on the unit? How can Bluetti further improve it? Are you potentially looking at purchasing this unit? And has my review been helpful to you? Leave your comments and suggestions below. Alright guys, as always, thanks for watching, stay safe, stay green, and I'll catch you in the next one.